So far, we've seen that all rules and validations are executed on the client field by field interactively. However, some of them, such as the referential integrity validations, for example, the category ed validation, require going to the server to be resolved. These validations are triggered from the client, and once they are performed on the server, execution continues on the client with the others. But we have also seen that at the end of this process, when the user presses confirm, all these rules and validations are executed again on the server and in the same order, followed by these actions. The last two executed only if the previous one was successful. These actions are only executed here on the server because they are the ones that actually impact the data. If instead of being in insert mode, we were in update mode, the action on the attraction table would be an update. And if we were in delete mode, it would be delete. So, after the validate action, if it was successful, according to the mode, one of the three possibilities is executed on the table. If the mode is insert, the order is given to insert a record. If it is update, to update. And if it is delete, to delete. And after this, if this operation on the table, insert, update, or delete was successful, the commit is executed, and the result is returned to the front end. The new feature that we introduce here is that at the backend level, we will be able to trigger rules immediately before each of these actions, or immediately after each one. For example, right before validating all the data, or right after that moment. For example, if we trigger the rule immediately before validation, then it will be executed immediately after having validated and triggered the rules of all the fields, and regardless of whether or not an error has occurred in this process. It is that this moment on BeforeValidate is immediately prior to the complete validation, that is to say, to the check that there has not been any error. On the other hand, if we fire a rule immediately after validation, it will only be executed if the validation was successful. And we will know something else, that it will be executed immediately before launching the operation on the database, insert, update, or delete, whichever corresponds to the mode. So, if the mode is insert, then the operation on the table will be insert. Immediately after AfterValidate, and without any action being executed in between, we have BeforeInsert, which occurs immediately before asking the DBMS to insert the record into the table. Then it inserts it. And immediately after the insert, if it was successful, we have AfterInsert. All of these are known as rule trigger events because they capture those specific moments between actions as events, allowing rules to be triggered at those exact, very precise points in time. To clarify, let's consider a possible example. In the transaction, we had an auto-numbered identifier. This ensures that when the record is inserted, the database will automatically assign it the next number after the last one issued. But if the user in a previous execution had deleted the last record, by inserting in this run the new, instead of giving you the ID of the eliminated person, 3, which is the last one, the database will assign it the following. As a result, number 3 will be lost. If we wanted to always assign the number that follows the last one actually in use, we could avoid using the database's auto-number feature and program it ourselves. We could create a procedure, later in the course we will implement this type of object, that we could call getNextID, for example. Given the table name, it would access the table, retrieve the last ID used, in this case 2, add 1 to it, and return that result to the caller. Then we would write this rule, where we assign to attraction id the result of invoking the procedure indicating the table. Let's think about when this rule will be triggered if written like this with nothing else. It will do it for the first time in the client as soon as the transaction is entered, since the rule assigns value to the first attribute. And also, we have not conditioned it to the mode, so it will fire in any of the three modes. We could condition it to fire only in insert mode, because in the other cases, it wouldn't make sense. So, as soon as we enter insert mode, the procedure, which will be executed in the server, will look for the last value in the table, add 1, and we'll already see 3 on the screen before the user has typed anything in attraction name. Then the user will go through the other fields and all the rest of the validations and rules will be triggered. And when finishing and pressing confirm, the server repeats everything, in particular this assignment rule. So the procedure is executed again, which searches again the table and returns the result 3, which is immediately assigned to attraction id. And the rest of validations and rules corresponding to the rest of the fields continue to be executed. It's possible that one of them fails, so the validate process will not be successful. In that case, processing doesn't continue. It returns to the front end to display the errors. Then, in that case, we will have invoked the procedure twice, once from the client and once from the server. For nothing, because the insert won't be performed. It only takes place if the validation succeeds. A slightly more efficient approach would be to fire this rule only on the server and only in insert mode, specifically on BeforeValidate. By conditioning the rule to this moment or trigger event, it will be executed immediately before the overall validation, which occurs exclusively on the server. For this reason, this rule, once it is conditioned to fire BeforeValidate, will never be triggered on the client. It will fire only at this moment. However, because this occurs before we know whether any errors exist, it may not be the best moment either. Wouldn't it be better to do it after validation? If we ask the rule to fire here, on AfterValidate, we will assign number 3 to attraction id, and the insertion of the record in the table will be immediately executed. Another, almost identical alternative is to trigger the rule on BeforeInsert. Here we don't need to condition it with AfterInsert because it is implicit. This rule will only be triggered if we are in insert mode and the validation has succeeded, meaning the insert operation on the table is about to be executed. If the mode is different, it will not be triggered. At this point, the procedure runs, obtains 3, and assigns it to attraction id. Note that this is the last possible moment to assign a value to the attributes of the record to be inserted. Because after this point, the record will be inserted, and after that, it will be too late. Any assignment to attributes after insertion will have no effect. Here we show 2 options for triggering the rule, if insert on AfterValidate or BeforeInsert. They occur at practically the same moment. The difference is that any rule that is conditioned to AfterValidate will be triggered before any rule conditioned to BeforeInsert, even if there are no automatic actions in between. In this case, we favor the second option. It is semantically clearer to fire the rule on BeforeInsert before it is inserted, rather than if insert on AfterValidate, but there is no major difference. As we have already seen, the operation on the database depends on the mode, and we will then have the BeforeInsert, before the insert, BeforeUpdate, before the update, and BeforeDelete, before the delete. To sum up, this is the most appropriate time to give the desired number to attraction id, since we are sure that the record will indeed be inserted immediately, and it will not fail because the validation will have already been performed and will have been successful. On the other hand, immediately after the AfterInsert, we have BeforeComplete. before completing the transaction, that is, immediately before the commit operation. And after the commit, we have AfterComplete. In this way, we can fire a rule immediately after the operation on the database, but before the commit, or immediately after the commit. In short, all rules that are not conditioned to be fired on any of these server events we've just studied will be executed on the client as the user goes through the fields. Then, immediately after the user confirms, they are fired again in the same order on the server. Only after that will the rules conditioned to these events be fired, in this order, before and after the actions related to the data. Here we show for simplicity only the insert, but as mentioned earlier, there are also update and delete. Let's emphasize once again what can be seen here. Any rule conditioned to one of these trigger events will be executed exclusively in the backend, never interactively in the client. We'll leave the analysis of a two-level transaction for another course.